Brooklyn stood at the edge of the crowded ballroom, her champagne flute untouched as she surveyed the sea of glittering gowns and crisp tuxedos. At 38, she was used to these high society events, but tonight felt different. The air was charged with an energy she couldn't quite place, a sense of anticipation that made her skin tingle. As the CEO of a successful tech startup, Brooklyn was no stranger to the spotlight. She had fought tooth and nail to reach the top of her field, sacrificing personal relationships and any semblance of a normal life along the way. But tonight, watching couples twirl across the dance floor, she felt a pang of loneliness that caught her off guard. "Not enjoying the party?" a deep voice asked from behind her. Brooklyn turned, coming face to face with a pair of striking green eyes. The man before her was tall, with broad shoulders, and a smile that could only be described as roguish. She recognized him immediately, Mason Blackwood, the notorious Playboy and heir to one of the largest media empires in the country. "I've been to better," Brooklyn replied coolly, raising an eyebrow. She had heard plenty about Mason's reputation and had no interest in becoming another notch on his bedpost. Mason's smile widened, apparently undeterred by her frosty reception. "Ouch! And here I thought my family threw the best parties in town. I'm Mason, by the way." "I know who you are," Brooklyn said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Your reputation precedes you." Something flashed in Mason's eyes, surprise perhaps, or a hint of challenge. "And what reputation is that, miss?" "Reynolds. Brooklyn Reynolds," she supplied, mentally kicking herself for engaging in conversation with him. "And I think we both know what reputation I'm referring to." Mason leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "Maybe you shouldn't believe everything you hear, Brooklyn. People can surprise you." Before Brooklyn could formulate a response, a commotion near the entrance caught their attention. A group of protesters had somehow made it past security and were now shouting and waving signs decrying the excesses of the wealthy elite. Mason's demeanor changed instantly, his easy charm replaced by a look of concern. "We need to get out of here," he said, taking Brooklyn's arm. "Things could get ugly fast." Brooklyn wanted to protest, to pull away from his touch, but the urgency in his voice made her hesitate. As the shouts grew louder and security guards rushed to contain the situation, she found herself allowing Mason to guide her towards a hidden side door. They emerged into a quiet hallway, the sounds of chaos muffled behind them. Brooklyn took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "Thank you," she said reluctantly. "That was quick thinking." Mason's cocky grin returned, though there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "All part of the service, Miss Reynolds. Now what do you say we find somewhere a bit more private to continue our conversation?" Brooklyn knew she should refuse, should make her excuses and leave. But something about the way Mason was looking at her, like he could see past her carefully constructed walls, made her pause. "Lead the way, Mr. Blackwood," she heard herself say. Mason led her through a maze of corridors, finally emerging onto a secluded balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool against Brooklyn's flushed skin, and she found herself grateful for the reprieve from the stuffy ballroom. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Mason said, gesturing to the twinkling lights of the skyline. "Sometimes I come out here just to remind myself that there's a whole world beyond these gilded cages we trap ourselves in." Brooklyn studied him, surprised by the hint of melancholy in his voice. "I wouldn't have pegged you for the introspective type," she said, her tone softer than before. Mason turned to face her, his expression serious. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Brooklyn, just like I'm sure there's more to you than the Ice Queen CEO the media loves to portray." Brooklyn felt a flicker of irritation at his words, but she couldn't deny the truth in them. "Fair enough," she conceded. "So why don't you tell me who the real Mason Blackwood is?" For a moment, she thought he might deflect with another charming quip, but then his shoulders sagged slightly, and he leaned against the balcony railing. "The real Mason Blackwood is tired," he said quietly. "Tired of living up to everyone's expectations, tired of playing a role that feels less and less like me every day." Brooklyn felt a sudden kinship with this man she had so quickly judged. How many times had she felt the same way, trapped by the persona she had created for herself? "I understand that feeling," she admitted. It's not easy being who everyone expects you to be all the time. Mason's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Brooklyn felt as though he could see right through her carefully constructed facade. No, it's not, he agreed. But maybe we don't have to be those people tonight. There was a question in his words, an invitation that Brooklyn knew she should refuse, but standing there under the stars, with the city spread out before them like a glittering carpet, she found herself nodding. Okay, she said softly. Just for tonight. What followed was unlike anything Brooklyn had experienced before. Mason took her on a whirlwind tour of the city, showing her hidden gems and secret spots that she, despite living in New York for years, had never known existed. They ate street tacos from a hole-in-the-wall restaurant, danced to a street musician's soulful saxophone, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. As the night wore on, Brooklyn felt the walls she had so carefully constructed begin to crumble. She found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, her fears, her dreams, the loneliness that sometimes threatened to consume her. And in return, Mason opened up about the pressure of living up to his family's legacy, the emptiness he felt despite his seemingly charmed life. It was nearly dawn when Mason finally brought her back to her apartment building. They stood on the sidewalk, both reluctant for the night to end. I had an amazing time, Brooklyn said, surprised by the sincerity in her own voice. Thank you for showing me a different side of you. Mason reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was surprisingly tender, and Brooklyn felt her heart skip a beat. Thank you for giving me a chance, he said softly. I know I didn't make the best first impression. Brooklyn laughed, shaking her head. No, you didn't, but I'm glad I was wrong about you. There was a moment of charged silence, the air between them crackling with unspoken possibilities. Mason leaned in slightly, his eyes searching hers for permission. Brooklyn knew she should step back, should end this night before it became something more complicated. But instead, she found herself closing the distance between them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but quickly deepened into something more passionate. Brooklyn felt as though every nerve in her body was on fire, responding to Mason's touch in a way she had never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, she felt dizzy with want and confusion. I should go, she said, her voice husky. We shouldn't. Mason nodded, though he made no move to step away. I know, but Brooklyn, I want to see you again. This doesn't have to be just one night. Brooklyn closed her eyes, trying to think rationally through the haze of desire and emotion. It's complicated, Mason. We're from different worlds, we have responsibilities. So we'll figure it out, he said, his voice filled with a determination that made her heart race. I know this is crazy, but I feel something with you that I've never felt before. Don't you think that's worth exploring? Brooklyn wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being was screaming at her to throw caution to the wind and dive headfirst into whatever this was between them. But years of carefully maintaining control, of putting her career above everything else, held her back. I need time, she said finally, meeting his gaze. This is all happening so fast, and I need to think. Mason nodded, understanding in his eyes. Of course, take all the time you need, but Brooklyn. He reached out, taking her hand in his. I am not giving up on this. On us. Whatever you decide, know that. With one last lingering kiss, Mason turned and walked away, leaving Brooklyn standing on the sidewalk, her mind and heart in turmoil. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions for Brooklyn. She threw herself into work, trying to distract herself from thoughts of Mason and the night they had shared. But everywhere she turned, there were reminders. His family's company logo on billboards, gossip columns speculating about his latest conquests, even the street musician they had danced to, still playing on his usual corner. It was a week later when Brooklyn's assistant knocked on her office door, looking nervous. Miss Reynolds? There's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's quite insistent. Brooklyn's heart raced, knowing instinctively who it was. Send him in, she said, smoothing her hair and straightening her posture. Mason strode into the office, looking as devastatingly handsome as she remembered. But there was a seriousness to his expression that gave her pause. "Brooklyn," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We need to talk." She gestured for him to sit, trying to maintain a professional demeanor despite the butterflies in her stomach. "What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwood?" Mason's eyes narrowed slightly at her formal tone. "I think we're well past Mr. Blackwood, don't you? Brooklyn, I've given you space. I've respected your need for time, but I can't stop thinking about you, about that night we shared, and I know you felt it too." Brooklyn sighed, her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "Mason, it's not that simple. We come from different worlds. We have different responsibilities. What happened that night was magical, yes, but it wasn't real life." Mason leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Wasn't it? Brooklyn, I've never felt more real, more alive than I did with you. I know we have obstacles to overcome, but I'm willing to face them if you are. The question is, are you brave enough to take that leap with me?" Brooklyn felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've worked so hard to get where I am, to build this life for myself. What if this ruins everything?" Mason stood, moving around the desk to kneel beside her chair. He took her hands in his touch sending sparks through her body. "What if it makes everything better?" he countered. "Brooklyn, I'm not asking you to give up your career or your independence. I'm asking you to let me in, to give us a chance to see where this could go. We're both successful, driven people. Why can't we have it all?" As Brooklyn looked into Mason's eyes, she saw a future she had never dared to imagine for herself. One filled with love, partnership, and the kind of passion she had only read about in books. It terrified her, but it also thrilled her in a way nothing else ever had. "Okay," she said softly, a smile spreading across her face. "Okay, let's do this. Let's see where this goes." The joy that lit up Mason's face was breathtaking. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a fervor that left her breathless. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and a little teary-eyed, Brooklyn felt as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The months that followed were a whirlwind of excitement and challenges. Brooklyn and Mason's relationship became fodder for the tabloids, their every move scrutinized and analyzed. There were naysayers who claimed it was just a publicity stunt, skeptics who bet on how quickly it would fall apart. But through it all, Brooklyn and Mason remained steadfast in their commitment to each other. They learned to navigate the complexities of merging their two worlds, Brooklyn's tech empire and Mason's media conglomerate. There were disagreements and misunderstandings, moments of doubt and fear. But there was also laughter, passion, and a deepening bond that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. 1 year to the day after their fateful meeting at the charity gala, Mason surprised Brooklyn with a picnic in Central Park. As they sat on a blanket under the stars, surrounded by twinkling fairy lights, he pulled out a small velvet box. "Brooklyn Reynolds," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This past year has been the most incredible journey of my life. You've challenged me, inspired me, and loved me in a way I never thought possible. I can't imagine spending another day without you by my side." He opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Brooklyn felt tears streaming down her face as she nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As Mason slipped the ring onto her finger, she marveled at how much her life had changed in just 1 year. She had taken a leap of faith, opening her heart to love and vulnerability, and found a happiness she never knew was possible. As they celebrated their engagement, wrapped in each other's arms under the New York sky, Brooklyn knew that this was just the beginning of their adventure together. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome, but with Mason by her side, she felt ready to face anything. The story of Brooklyn and Mason, the Ice Queen CEO and the reformed Playboy, became a modern-day fairy tale, proof that sometimes taking a chance on love can lead to the most unexpected and beautiful of happy endings. Years later, as Brooklyn watched her and Mason's children playing in the backyard of their Hamptons home, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. There had been ups and downs, moments of doubt and fear, but through it all, their love had only grown stronger. She felt Mason's arms wrap around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts, love," he murmured. Brooklyn turned in his embrace, meeting his gaze with a smile. "Just thinking about how lucky we are," she said softly. "How one night changed everything." Mason's eyes sparkled with the same mischief and love that had captivated her all those years ago. "I told you people could surprise you," he teased, leaning in for a kiss. As their lips met, Brooklyn silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought Mason into her life that night. She had taken a risk, stepping out of her comfort zone and into the unknown, and found a love and a life beyond her wildest dreams. Their story wasn't perfect. No real love story ever is, but it was theirs. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with the sound of their children's laughter floating on the breeze, Brooklyn knew that she wouldn't change a single moment of their journey together.